Hello, party people, and welcome to the 5th episode of the first season of Law and Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to the legal technology revolution. I am Bill, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Rob. And our guest today on this very special episode is Alex Shusterman. Alex is the eDiscovery manager over at Accenture. But before we get to Alex, we want to bring you yet another
Sightings of Radical Brilliance.
Today, we're going to talk about an article written by Rob Robinson. Rob has been in the industry forever, and those of you that know Rob know he's sort of required reading for our industry. He wrote an article called The 4 Eras of eDiscovery, One Approach to Framing Market Growth. It's really interesting the way he did this, and it made me feel kind of old, Rob. I'm sure since you're older than me and been in the industry about 3 or 4 years longer than me, you probably felt even older. But he breaks down the industry into 4 eras: the concordance era, the Clearwell era, the relativity era, and the next era with a question mark. And that goes from 2002 all the way through to 2023. Pretty interesting article.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. I like the article, and it's, I've kind of always thought of the industry like this. I remember when we started with concordance, and that just seemed like the dominant platform. We were always going to use it. Then Clearwell with, incredible, marketing came on the scene, and, relativity is now technology that, we're all familiar with. And it's interesting that, starting at 2018, Rob has this, next era that's a little bit undefined, but, it shares characteristics with the other ones. We're still seeing a lot of growth in the market. We're seeing, a huge jump in the expected revenue, which again, doesn't surprise me. We're not running short on data, or legal matters.
Yeah, I mean, he's expecting the market to grow from today about a $10.1 billion market to an $18.7 billion market in 2023, which shouldn't be surprising, right? I mean, we've seen some pretty amazing growth. From 2012 to 2018, we went from 4.73 to 10.11. So the growth is slowing a little bit, but when you think about the growth, I mean, you think about that, the compound annual growth of forecasted at over 13%, still amazing for an industry that's roughly 20 some odd years old.
It really is. And, the only thing I wish there was in this article was like an overlay of how much, how many terabytes of data were associated with each era, because I'm sure, that would be interesting too. But, great article by Rob. We've worked with Rob before, and, very informative.
I think that we think that next era is going to be probably, if not named the Microsoft era, it's certainly going to be heavily influenced by Microsoft, I think. So it'll be interesting what qualifies as that next era for this article.
I don't know. I think we should shoot a little higher. Maybe call it the Rob and Bill era.
I'm all for it. The Law and Candor with Rob and Bill era. I love it. All right. Before our egos get in the way of this podcast, let's go to, let's introduce our guest speaker. So today we're going to talk about moving to the cloud. This needs to be a partnership between legal and IT, and legal operations was sort of created to bridge that gap between legal and IT. And in this episode, we're going to discover how moving to the cloud can radically innovate your data infrastructure. And Alex Shusterman is a perfect guy to have for something like this. So Alex, please introduce yourself. Welcome to the program.
Sure. Thanks, guys. So I'm a discovery program manager for Accenture Legal. I sit in their litigation group. I've been in the eDiscovery space for about 9 years now since I graduated from law school. So I'm an attorney and a technologist by background. And before coming to Accenture, I worked in the vendor space, wearing a number of hats, processing, project management, you name it, and then ended up moving into a consulting role where my time was focused in 2 primary areas. So first was enterprise eDiscovery program management and development, so helping corporations build out their eDiscovery programs. But I also spent a considerable amount of time actually doing legacy data migration and remediation projects for corporate clients, folks moving from platforms like Autonomy EAS to Enterprise Vault to Office 365, moving off of Lotus Notes, things like that. In my day-to-day role now, I manage day-to-day eDiscovery litigation cases for Accenture. I also work closely with our IT organization to help understand what our technology roadmap looks like and understand how that impacts our various eDiscovery workflows and processes.
Alex, when a corporation decides to move to the cloud, it's a big deal. And, we've kind of seen it to a different degree at a lot of the companies that we've worked with over the year. I would say that it never goes completely smoothly, but how do you advise a corporation who's kind of like at that place where they're trying to make that decision? What can you tell them?
It's a really daunting decision, and I understand that. Perhaps I'm a little bit jaded because I've been doing it for so long, at least before coming to Accenture, and my opinion of it hasn't really changed since coming in-house. But I look at it as the same process and workflow that you would follow for deploying any other new tool or data source internally in your company. You're decommissioning one tool, hopefully, and moving to a better one. But like I said, it's daunting, right? You're moving in some of these cases your entire company's email, or 15 years of email that people are still looking at periodically to do their jobs. I get it.
Well, and on top of that, what makes it weird is, we kind of frame this podcast in the scope of, what does a corporate legal department do? But often this decision gets made by someone else, and corporate legal is sort of brought on this journey, willingly or unwillingly. Like it seems like that would cause additional confusion.
It does. And the thing is, you have to be a key stakeholder. And if you're not, that's somewhere to start the conversation, right? When you hear about a migration project that you're moving to a new, platform, whatever it is that you're moving to, whether it's Office 365 or something else, it shouldn't be a surprise when the migration discussion comes up. It should have been, you've been well aware of that beforehand. And as a key stakeholder, you shouldn't be afraid to ask a lot of questions, because as your legal representative to this effort, they can have serious impact. You're talking about data privacy, impact on litigation, corporate investigations, things like supervisory review for companies that are regulated and need to check emails for broker dealers. It has a lot of moving parts to it, and if you're not asking the questions, I'm willing to bet that IT won't necessarily be asking them, because they just don't think about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, our industry and legal operations, even internally, sort of has that hybrid role of between legal and IT. But when you're doing something like this, it's really important. I mean, I used to say all the time, lawyers and IT professionals don't usually sit at the same lunch table, right? But I think when you're going through something like this, it's really important, not just legal operations, but litigation. The attorneys need to work in some sort of collaboration with IT. Talk to that a little bit and how important that is to the process.
Well, a strong eDiscovery program is not siloed, right? And this has nothing to do with migrations and everything to do with your daily operations. It's not just legal and it's not just IT. It's a joint venture between both groups. Our scope covers such breadth that you need to have access to expertise, like you said, from both attorneys and technical people. Because you need to have a seat at the table, a regular rhythm of meetings with your key IT leaders in your company, and know the roadmap. Like I said, a move to the cloud should not be coming as a surprise to you. A big migration project, no matter how daunting and how big it seems, shouldn't be coming as a surprise to you. So be prepared to ask questions and set expectations that you need to be a stakeholder very early on in the process. But something else I want to highlight that's really important is that legal's job is also to be a good business partner, right? Your job is to help protect the business, but we also don't want to be the people that are saying no all the time. And it's really easy to want to say no to a project like this because it is so big, it has so many moving parts, and there is a lot of risk associated with it.
And there's also never going to be a good time to do it.
There is never a good time to do a migration. And part of that is understanding where and what the data currently is, right? So we're talking about a specific project. You're going to go move from Lotus Notes, you're going to move from Enterprise Vault into Office 365. Ask questions. How far back does the data go? Who are people that you need to make sure you get their email out of the platform first? Do you have C-suite folks that if something happened, it's going to create a huge amount of churn? All of these are important questions to ask and will help influence what the flow of the migration process looks like.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for IT to explain to legal that they're going to get some real benefits out of this too. I mean, if you just look at what the Microsoft suite of services offers in the compliance center, the amount of self-service that legal can now do without IT's help, without relying on IT going forward, there's a huge benefit. And I think sometimes what happens is legal doesn't know about everything that they have coming to them, doesn't understand all of the collateral benefits that come to them as a byproduct of IT making this move to the cloud.
Absolutely. And that's true. And we at Accenture, in the eDiscovery group, we've had great luck with using Office 365's eDiscovery suite, and it's really helped us streamline our preservation processes, our collection processes, and it's really reduced our ultimate time to review. Now, of course, not everything lives in Office 365 for us, but a lot of stuff does. And that makes life much easier for us. And so it's okay to ask as legal, well, what's in it for us, right? How does this help us, right? So we're taking on all this risk. We're going to move terabytes or petabytes of data between platforms. Why are we doing it?
Well, and Alex, as someone who's kind of taken this journey with clients before, what are the big things to avoid?
Big things to avoid. There shouldn't be any surprises. And what I mean is something will go wrong during a migration process. It's all about how you're prepared to deal with it and your expectations up front that it was going to happen in the first place. Even well thought out migrations with all the right stakeholders can go off the rails if expectations up front are not clearly set and documented. Things like dealing with legal holds, dealing with how you're going to validate data once it gets moved, and what you're going to do when something does go wrong. An employee's mailbox fails to move, something becomes corrupt. The source archive has a major issue with it. You're moving off the legacy archive for a reason. My guess is it's not in perfect health. All of these things, be prepared for them up front and talk about it.
Interesting. So now let's flip it. What are some of the benefits? And I'm not just talking about the anticipated benefits. Have you seen the company get some unanticipated benefits, or things that you didn't necessarily think of, but when you look back, you're like, wow, that really that's fantastic that we got that as a result of moving to the cloud.
To me, the best results come from having a discussion before the migration starts, right? So IT is always focused on let's get the data moved, let's get it done as quickly as possible, and as cost effectively as possible. But some of the benefits come when you're looking at what the data is inside the environment. Some of this data is really, really old. You really need to keep all of it. These migration efforts are a prime opportunity to remediate data on the way out. Leave some of it behind, purge it, bring in your corporate records, folks, and see if there's data in these platforms that you can get rid of, because you're ultimately going to reduce your footprint when you move to the cloud. Those scenarios are where I saw clients end up the happiest.
I had a question for you, Alex. Like, it seems, we talk about this statistic all the time. I think it's 90% of the Fortune 500 or 1,000 is at some process in moving to the cloud. Is it even realistic to not move to the cloud at this point? Like, is that going to work for anyone?
I am sure there are circumstances where you will have to keep some things on premise where some data just doesn't lend itself to being moved, or there's some roadblock from a security perspective. But I come from the Accenture side of things, and we have a huge Office 365 footprint. For us, if we can do it for a company as large as we are, over 450,000 employees, I think anybody can try it in some way, shape, or form.
And I agree with you, because when we really do see that with companies that are, I guess, further into that process. You're right. There is a tangible benefit in being able to collect data a lot faster, when it's cloud-based versus, going to 17 different systems like we've seen before. Like, this has kind of been a slow revolution that's been taking place. But it has a great benefit.
The other thing I would add is that going to the cloud removes some of the burden of loss, right? So the big fear when you move to the cloud, I think, and some of the pushback that I used to hear from clients was, well, how do we get the data out? What happens if we can't get the data out? And that's all part of the upfront negotiation process, making sure you understand how data goes in and out and how it fits into your workflow. But when you're hosting all of these sources on premise in some way, shape, or form, you could have 1 million data centers. But my guess is that your infrastructure is not going to be nearly as robust as a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft. And there's serious benefit to that too.
Yeah, Alex, thanks so much for joining us today. This was a great discussion. I think that there are so many companies that I know you guys were early adopters, but there are so many companies that are still going through this process or are about to go through this process. And hopefully this will be a little helpful to them. And if I could share some takeaways here from your discussion, one would be plan, right? Try to anticipate every scenario so that no one or no single person or certainly no department should be surprised by the move. That said, even with the best plans, something is going to go wrong, right? So you have to be able to be flexible, and everybody's going to be able to deal with the fact that this is a big Herculean effort here. Migration efforts are a prime opportunity to purge or otherwise remediate data. I thought that was a fantastic point. And then finally, as Rob stated and you agreed with, there is no good time to make this move. So if it's inevitable, let's start planning it immediately, get all the key stakeholders involved, and put the best possible plan in place. This was a fantastic episode. I really appreciate you joining.
Thanks, Alex.
Happy to. Thanks.
So thanks everybody else who did tune in. Stay tuned for our next episode, which is entitled Moving to the Cloud Part 2, and that's when we take you on a law firm journey. Thanks so much, everybody.